I'm James Howell, and this is 11th Heaven Critical Suplex, an extended look at Grasshopper Manufacture's 2007 game No More Heroes, written and directed by Suda51. Heaven 7, Volodarskii with Lana Polansky. We're opening this video with a look at how No More Heroes incorporates its title screen into its environments. I think of a video game's title screen like the cover of a book. It gives you the thing's name, and its visuals give you some idea about the content. I actually include arcade-style attract modes as part of that definition of a title screen, since they identify the game at a glance, even if they're not literally a static screen giving the name of the game. For this reason, the cliché about not judging a book by its cover holds somewhat less true for in-game title screens. I mean, that's the whole idea behind an attract mode, right? Book covers are assembled by publishers apart from the author, and title screens are often made by the same people who imagined and designed the game. That notwithstanding, let's take the static press start screen with the title on it as representative of the whole. It's very much a closed book cover, a barrier or a seal that you open in order to access the imagined world beyond. I still get the same thrill at a press start screen as I did when I was a kid because it meant crossing the threshold into this cool new world. And that feeling of crossing a threshold is what No More Heroes cuts out of its title sequences. No More Heroes doesn't give us the clean barrier of an isolated, nodal title card. It incorporates the title into the environments themselves. The game doesn't introduce itself with a business card so much as it does a handshake. Or perhaps a wrestling bear hug. The game greets us with its name and its presence when we fire it up for the first time by making that name the marquee of the No More Heroes motel. Beyond that, No More Heroes has 11 unique save locations, one inside Travis's room and one right before each boss fight. Each boss's save point incorporates the name into the background as graffiti that hangs right behind Travis. Several of the accompanying illustrations, in fact, also appear as monograms that Travis can wear as he buys and scavenges t-shirts across Santa Destroy. I think that blending the game's title with Travis's environment reinforces the connection between Travis and the player. We don't cross a threshold into this world, we're already in it the moment we turn on the game. As soon as we arrive, we inhabit Travis's universe. You know, the game doesn't even give us the option of choosing a file to load. It just picks up where we left off. The transition is seamless and elegant. It pushes us into the world and into Travis without the pause or intake of breath we might make before standing on the precipice of a title screen and jumping. So, with that, I'm going to step over to the interview mic and speak with this episode's guest. Today I'm joined by Lana Polansky, art critic, poet, and digital artist. She hosts the website Sufficiently Human, which features critical writing, including her own. You can find her work there and elsewhere on Killscreen, Paste, The Arcade Review, Wall Street Journal Speakeasy, Billboard, lots of others. Check the video description for links to her work and to her Patreon. Lana, welcome.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here. No More Heroes takes a critical, almost condemning in some spots, look at a certain kind of gamer. What do you think about that kind of attempt to discuss the audience in a game?
It's funny to me because I think a lot of people react to games which actually aren't in any way trying to indict them. They are challenging, but in terms of how they relate back to like what the player thinks, and I'm talking about like experimental shit that most people look at and they go, I have no idea how to parse this. I think most of those games are basically kind of indifferent, and they're just there for the person who wants to pick them up.
Right.
And it makes no judgment one way or the other. But I think a lot of people confront those games and they try to play them, and like they have a difficulty actually being in dialogue with them because they don't have sort of the foreknowledge to know how to go about parsing them.
Right.
And they blame the game, and they say that this game doesn't respect me as a player. And they get angry at the game rather than pointing the finger back at themselves and saying, well, maybe I'm not doing enough to try to read this and give it a fair shake. So it's really funny to me because those games are not honestly trying to like say anything particularly negative about the player. They just sort of are. And then you have a game like this, which kind of is actually, like, insulting the hell out of people.
Right.
And yet somehow, like, that's actually more desirable than a game that just is indifferent to you. I guess because it does the work of pointing the finger back at you, so you don't have to do that work yourself.
Yeah. No, I think that is. I think that's very on mark for the spirit of the game. During the opening cinematic, Travis gives like kind of a voiceover, and he's like, "I know a lot of you gamers don't have a lot of patience out there. At least that's what Bishop, the guy at the video store, said." And it's kind of like the game through Travis acknowledges the player, puts down the player, and then actually makes that even worse by not even having it his genuine observation that he was indifferent enough to the player that he had to get it secondhand. But and the fact that he brings all this to the fore, it starts the game off on the tone of, "I'm talking about you."
Yeah.
And that's something that is very hard to look at in terms of figuring out both how to understand that and what you can do with that understanding. And that latter question is a particularly interesting one, I think.
Yeah, but there's a lot of tension with, like, self-reference, and as you mentioned, a certain discomfort with presenting a certain stereotype of, but not totally an accurate stereotype, of a certain kind of Western white Japanese fetishist.
Right.
And it's important that we understand him as a fetishist, that this is something that he has elevated to a kind of erotic ideal.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think that connects with the whole fantasy reality question in the game. As a fetishist, he tries to make as much of the media his reality as possible. And a lot of the way that this game is presented in terms of the pixel images, pixel icons, the video game dream, that is his projection of that media. He sees the world through the lens of the media that he consumes. And
he sees himself in that sort of role of, he sees himself as the hero of his own epic tale in that sense as well.
And his epic tale is a sweet 8-bit retro Wonderland.
Where he's in a mobile suit.
Yes.
But that's why he jumps at, and I think that's also getting to sort of the implied violence in that kind of deferred masculine desire for power that you see in a lot of alt dudes, or, nice guys, or whatever, beta males, which I hate that term, but people use it. Yes. There's no such thing as alpha and beta in human society. It doesn't exist. Anyway.
Yes.
But to that extent of, like, men who are not particularly, like, successful at being traditionally masculine men, but still desire the birthright that comes with being, like, a domineering, violent dude. So that's why someone like Travis would jump at the chance to be an assassin and be the world's best assassin, because it allows him to live out his fantasy of being, the, maybe not the hero, but the main character in his personal story.
Yeah.
Which is this highly stylized, media-influenced kind of epic tale of power and control.
And that personal story is much more interesting than his actual story of somebody who quit high school, became an otaku, and doesn't have a job and lives in a hotel.
So somebody who doesn't have a lot of power in his day-to-day life.
Yes.
And who craves it and thinks he deserves it. And this is how he's going to get it, through violence.
Yeah.
This is how he's going to earn, sex as well, as part of that dynamic.
No More Heroes is, I think No More Heroes is really interesting, coming on the heels of Killer 7, which was Sudogoichi's first kind of major exposure to what I want to call Anglophone gamers, an international audience, really. Maybe more specifically, in this case, an American audience whose tastes he's called macho in some interviews. So, without presuming intention, it seems really timely that his next game portrays a combination of kind of macho American violence with a misfit embracing of niche Japanese media, of, an American otaku who's kind of co-opting those things.
I definitely get that sense, and I've seen this before in particularly Japanese games, of a certain degree of contempt for the weeaboo.
Right.
the Occidental otaku.
Right.
I laughed at my own joke.
It's not Occidental, it's on purpose. I'm so sorry, go on.
Oh no. So I've definitely seen this in Japanese games in particular, a certain contempt for, I guess, what you might call a certain degree of cultural appropriation.
Right.
Of something which is, if you are an otaku, it's not like a particularly great thing in Japan to be like that guy who's at Akiba all the time.
Right.
At maid cafes, watching hentai, playing video games all day.
Right.
Like, that's not particularly, like, a respectable thing to be, any more than it is over here.
And there must be some wonderment that there is a degree of pride taken in that.
Yeah. And I think that pride is inherently kind of racist, because it's rooted in a sort of cultural exoticism. It has nothing to do with Japan, the place, and the Japanese people as people.
Right.
It has to do with a very idealized kind of image of what Japanese culture is. Also, it tends to be very misogynist, because it also packs in a lot of assumptions about what Japanese women are like.
Right, yes.
So...
Yeah, and I think that's very close to the heart of this, which is that one of the things about Travis is that his identity is, he doesn't have a political identity.
Mm-hmm.
And this is actually, I mean, most action game characters don't have a political identity, at least not an overt one, but that's kind of a distinguishing feature in this game following Killer 7, because that was a game that was very heavily embroiled in Japanese politics post World War II, policy. And,
yeah, that game's sweet.
Oh god, it's so good. But I would love it if there were more games like that. But yeah, anyway, Travis's identity is basically comprised of media. I mean, what you're seeing right now on the screen, I mean, that is, he's dreaming about his about the shmup shooter, cart that of his favorites, Magic Robot Schoolgirl franchise.
Yeah.
Oh, and just to interject real fast about what's going on the screen, I wanted to 1cc this for the recording, but 1ccing a shooter like this typically requires knowing where everything is going to appear before it actually comes on the screen, which is not that interesting to watch. So I'm doing one playthrough to show where everything shows up and not attacking anything, and then a second playthrough to smash everything up. So, anyway, moving along. One of the first promotional images of this game that made my jaw drop and think, I've got to get this, is in the very beginning, after you do the tutorial level, Travis is in his room, putting on his jacket, flipping his saber around like a pistol and knocking it in its slot, and then he goes over to this poster on the wall that has the image on the left side of that shooter screen. It's that in color. He goes up to it, doesn't quite kiss it, or maybe he does kiss it, but he actually turns to the camera. Very rarely does he turn to the camera and acknowledge the audience, but in this instance he does. He turns and just kind of lustily says, "Moe."
Ugh.
Right?
God.
Right? It's just like, I thought to myself, oh god, this is going to be vicious. Oh god, I'm in.
That's great. Oh, that's great. That's great because, okay, I saw this hilarious screen cap of this totally self-deluded commenter. I'm going to assume on some game website. That somebody had capped on Twitter about, I think it was about like Dead or Alive localization.
Oh god,
and
yes.
Not getting the 3D booty.
Uh-huh.
That even though you can just look up hentai anywhere on the internet, no one is censoring you.
Right.
Like, and no one will care. But anyway, yeah, so it was just this really self-deluded comment about, oh, all Japanese developers only ever see from the West. It's not about fans. All they ever see is angry journalists that hate their culture and want to censor them. And we, the gamers, can now speak out about this and be heard and
right
and grow the cultural depth of like Japanese video games and blah 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 blah. And it's like, you just want to see that ass. Like, that's all this is about. And I'm like when you look at a game like this, like No More Heroes, or really any number of games or pieces of media which even Persona has this as well, very deliberately taking aim at Western otaku lovers.
Right.
Especially, like, white young men. When you look at that, there's so much contempt in those games and those, anime shows and films and whatever for that particular cultural phenomenon. It's like, they don't respect you as much as you think they do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that's interesting about No More Heroes is it takes that element and it sort of wraps its critique in the same... How am I going to say this? It wraps its critique by returning the favor, by taking this presumably all-American character. His name is Travis Touchdown. He lives
Yeah, I
in
thought
the
that
South.
was so funny.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that it's deliberate in this regard because he lives in the Southwest, and one of the main things that comes to mind when you think of America, when people outside of America think of America, like there's Texas and Hollywood. And so Texas is this thing. It particularly works for some of the content. I'll call them obsessions in a very positive light, because we all have those things that appear recurring in our work. But one of Sudogoichi's obsessions is luchador wrestling, or wrestling period. Mm-hmm. And so there are a lot of wrestling moves, like Travis picking up the luchador mask off the ground, seeing a letter that magically triggers his memory of a sweet pro wrestling move, and now he can perform it during the boss fight. So there's this sort of like reaching out from a Japanese developer to pick up this reverse stereotype, I guess, of an American, while that American is also stereotyping Japan in his kind of persona and his obsessions.
And there's definitely this fraught relationship with, and we've seen this since like Earthbound, right? Like this very fraught relationship with how post-occupation Japan sees American culture. Right. Which is not necessarily totally negative, and it's also dependent on the particular artist at the particular time. So, Shigesato Itoi had this particular, actually kind of compassionate, but still critical, sort of character portrait of what Ness represents. Ness is a sympathetic character, but there are certain things about the culture that he's capitalist, consumerist culture in which the adventure takes place. Right. Which, come to bear on who he is as a character and his motivations, and that's sort of interesting to watch. A game like this is more of a blunt instrument in terms of...
Yeah, I guess appropriate imagery for the means of combat,
just in terms of that critique. It's a little bit more damning, I think. It's a little bit more of an indictment.
Right.
But, you still see that fraught relationship of, there's a certain exchange that's taken place, a cultural exchange, but there's also a certain degree of resentment.
Right.
Of, this is a culture that, historically speaking, not that World War II era Japan was a particularly nice place to be.
Right.
But, post that, there was a really extended period of American economic and cultural imperialism that took place in Japan, and even before that as well. So there is this sort of fraught relationship of we have this history together, and it's not totally good, and we don't necessarily hate you, but we also don't necessarily respect you.
Right.
And we don't necessarily forgive you.
Right.
Yeah, and when you appropriate our culture, it's not exactly a compliment.
Right.
That's what I get from these particular sorts of imagery.
Particularly when somebody like Travis, it's more muted in Travis's instance, because at no point is there a Japanese woman that he fetishizes. I mean, he fetishizes Sylvia, who incidentally, actually now that I think about it, her biography indicates that she is half Ukrainian, half Japanese, raised in France. So every element of exoticism you could get.
Oh yeah, that's actually perfect.
Yeah.
And it's what I think is interesting is when you see inside his house, he doesn't have any actual, other than Sylvia, Japanese women that he's fetishizing, but he does have a shitload of little anime statues.
Yeah.
Those little statuettes.
It's a very merchandised identity.
Yeah. So his idealization of Japanese femininity is absolutely rooted in hentai. It's rooted in pornography.
Oh yes, absolutely.
So, yeah, I mean, he doesn't actually fetishize real women. They're all, they're fantasies.
Right.
They're drawings.
One of the things about the way this segment tells its story when Travis goes on the date with Sylvia, I mean, the cutscene where Sylvia takes his arm, he says, what is it? I wouldn't do that if I were you. Oh shit, oh shit. And it's basically implied that he premature ejaculates, like, as they're walking, literally because a girl touched him. And,
Yeah.
like, on his arm. So that sort of otherness of the object of desire, such that when he comes into mere contact with it, that's enough to, I guess, for him to think that that's what it is, I guess, in a way.
I guess he's just so unused to that kind of affection that just the mere hint of it, he's so sensitive to it.
Yes.
In a way, because he's so not used to it and he craves it so much.
Yeah.
It's, part of the power fantasy for him. And it is very much like implicating the player, and you are engaging in someone's power fantasy, and we're going to depict it in a way which is not necessarily noble and rewarding, but actually quite self-destructive and pathetic. That erotic dimension, that fetishism, is tied up in wanting to feel, in control. Part of feeling like you're in control is having people who want to be close to you, especially like objects of desire.
And also, now come to think of it, also having earned that instead of having it been given, which is, that's his main mode of social interaction, is that he's earning it, right? He's the sweetest assassin with a sword, therefore he's earned sex.
For him, this is something that is 100% transactive. He doesn't live in a world where you can just freely give and take that kind of affection, and that kind of intimacy is its own reward. For him, he has to feel like, I guess, what Austin Walker would call the new power fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
He has to be able to feel like he's deserving and owed. It has to feel like it's come through merit. He has to belong to that meritocracy, which is very literally in this game a power ranking.
Yes.
That displays at the end of every boss fight. It's literally it's a scoreboard that he's trying to get to the top of.
Yeah.
It's something that is very kind of abstract cultural hegemony that is literalized in this game.
Right. Like, I mean, the way to a girl's heart is through her leaderboard.
Yeah.
Is almost actually literally what it's saying. And so when Travis is in a situation where Sylvia asks him on a date,
I wouldn't do that if I were you. Oh shit. I'm packing heat, baby.
And gives him that affection freely without him having to earn it. I mean, it is that surprising and, as you said, that sensitive of a thing that it's results in something that is fairly embarrassing, but that does not embarrass him. Mm-hmm. I imagine because he doesn't know to be embarrassed by it.
There. Welcome to Harvey Volodarski's Magic Freak Show of the century. It'll be a killer night. So let's get started.
This is so weird. This just what we're seeing here. It's like this is what gives this sort of chapter that weird, goofy, illusory quality. And at which point it's meta. Is Harvey and Travis are literally playing a game with each other. They are making believe that they are on a stage in front of an audience, to the extent that they will treat each other as buddies. I mean, it's like outside of the fact that they're going to kill each other, you wouldn't know that they're enemies. And except for right here, where Travis says that he's going to kill him.
I'm going to kill you.
And even then, after he says that, he goes through with the buzzsaw trick and comes out okay. They're smiling at each other and they go at it.
And they even, during the fight, they even engage in a couple of tricks for the audience, where there's a interesting inclusion of an audience clapping, despite the fact that the theater is empty.
Yes.
Except for Sylvia.
It also has some qualities of a performance for an audience. The assistants, for example, those are a unique feature of this fight because they are, in many ways, passive observing characters in a very dynamic environment. Yes, but they are in a cage, and they are an audience themselves, because whenever Travis gets hit, they laugh, and whenever Travis hits Harvey, they kind of shake their head, kind of like, oh no, the dope. And also,
although they're interesting to me, I find them very interesting because, okay, for the most part, they're generally imprisoned unless they're brought out to perform an illusion as part of the fight at various sort of trigger points during this battle. But at the very, very end, when Harvey loses, they come out and they help Travis, which I find kind of interesting.
That is really interesting. That is something I think I noticed, but never really put much time or thought into.
Something that, like, yeah, it struck me as kind of like, oh, that is a nice touch. And it's like a split second, like it's nothing. Like it's not a particularly extended scene, but you do see it where they tie up Harvey to that contraption and he's sawed in half.
Right, and I mean, you would think based off of the body language of their reactions in the cage that they had some sort of I don't know if loyalty is the right word, but
yeah.
But actually, maybe that is the right word. Some sort of loyalty to Harvey, but they don't. Their loyalty is to the show / Victor.
Yeah, there's a sort of sense of, were Harvey to win, they're in a position where, I mean, they're literally in a cage. So they're not in any position to betray him at this point.
Right.
Because
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I want to call attention to the clash sequence here. If Travis loses to Harvey, Harvey will turn Travis's sword into a kind of bubble wand, which you can't really attack with. And we'll get back to that, but I wanted just to verbally mark that while we're here. Anyway, I'm sorry. Please go on.
He has a considerable degree of power over them. The second that he has no power over them, they come out and they reverse that dynamic.
That's really interesting.
I mean, there's still the complication of, like, they're doing it through the actions of Travis. Like, Travis is legitimizing them taking control of the situation. And
right.
That is, in itself, kind of problematic.
Right.
But it's also kind of this interesting touch of, like, they could have been totally indifferent. Or they could have been enemies unto themselves. They could have been lackeys. But they're not. They're waiting for their moment to strike.
Yeah.
So they don't respect these assassins either.
What's this?
To the extent that Travis is indulging a fantasy in this otaku warrior thing, I mean, very clearly the illusion theme of this suggests that Harvey is himself indulging a fantasy of being a magician, albeit a magician who plays for no audience. And
yeah.
So there's that farcical, artificial quality to even Harvey's persona and his projection. I mean, and it's in his moves. Like one of the things that we saw before, when Travis goes for a clash, and when the player fails that clash attack, Harvey, the bosses have special moves. Harvey will turn it into a magic kind of schoolgirl wand, is what I think of it as. Which I think of it that way because it's totally appropriate for Travis in terms of what would turn his sword into a symbol of weakness, which would, in his frame of reference, be that. But no, yeah, it's like his moves are all about this illusion, and the illusion is directed toward the player and not Travis. Mm-hmm. The upcoming upside down sequence is something that.
Oh yeah, I'm not even playing this game, and I found that infuriating.
It is tough to navigate.
You asshole. Is it like reverse controls too?
Yep.
Oh, that's terrible.
Yep.
What an asshole.
The only thing that is the same is forward and back. So you, I mean, basically have to keep, in terms of the, performance quality of it, you basically have to keep your auto attack reticule on Harvey and just move forward and away from him because it is impossible for me to parse things like that visually.
Yeah, I have a lot of trouble with that too.
Fortunately, the AI gets stuck on repeating that same move back to back, and Travis gets about 6 to 7 free hits during Harvey's cooldown, so you can use it as an opportunity to whittle him down. No less obnoxious for that, though. Anyway, one of the big themes for the fight seems to be illusion, both in the boss moves and the cutscenes, which I really think should make us question how much we're really seeing Travis's and Sylvia's relationship develop here.
Yeah, I definitely see that. And it's really, again, very Carnival-esque, over the top.
Yes, Carnival, that is the perfect word for it.
Yeah, it's definitely this. And I always, whenever I see that kind of stuff in games, I always get a sense of, pointing the finger back at the player and going, well, you want to be entertained, and there's a certain, I don't want to say contempt, but there's a certain derision in that.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that has that right combination of apt and gentle.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a little bit derisive and it's playful. It's a playful way of going, you want to be entertained, you want to have fun, so let me throw you into something which is goofy and absurd and just kind of throws everything that you've put any kind of, like, value in playing this game and puts it all into question.
Right. And it, as a player, it has that effect on me. Like, I'm really not interested in the get laid subplot. I'm not interested in that. Power fantasies, while obviously fun depending upon the way it's presented, don't necessarily appeal to me when it comes to my thinking about a game that I want to do a project like this on.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that the game has something there beyond power fantasies makes it appealing to me in a significant way. And at the same time, if you look at my Twitter feed, I have got a ton of screen caps of the wrestling moves in this up there. And it's like, even insofar as like the wrestling moves are part of that facade of like, isn't this awesome? It's not real.
Yeah.
It's still awesome.
Yeah, that's very much the whole kind of crux of pro wrestling.
Yes.
And of a character, say like someone like Jerry Lawler, the King Jerry Lawler, who he's very much that kind of guy who's like, are you not entertained? Where he will totally like find something about an audience member and zero in on it and say something deeply insulting to them and just own it.
Right.
You know, he's that guy who is pointing the finger back at the audience and going, you know, you're a bunch of idiots, basically.
Right.
So, and I think sometimes he's a little bit too cruel, or had been in the past,
Right.
but it's something that I've always also kind of respected in a way.
It has a court jester quality.
Yeah, it does.
Especially in a mass media environment that has this customer is always right attitude. That don't insult the audience, give the audience what they want, and that's the audience is the king.
That's one of the funniest things about the king. The audience kind of wants, they're like, bring it on, you know, say the meanest thing you can about me, and they love it. Right. I mean, they hate it, but at a certain extent, they can't look away.
Right. No, totally.
Yeah. So that's hilarious to me, and I love when games throw you into that, where that happens, and you feel sort of, I don't know what just happened, but I feel vaguely insulted.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that was my feeling at the end of No More Heroes, and I like to wait several years after a game is released to write something about it, and that has largely to do with my own sort of mental processes in terms of sort of how long it takes for something to stew before I feel like there's something meaningful to do with it. But I remember when I finished the game back in 2008, I finished playing it. I thought, something just happened. I think it was at my expense. I don't know what it is. I'm going to sleep on this.
Yeah.
8 years later, here we go. The vagueness of that feeling notwithstanding, I was definitely prompted by the game's opening shots, announcing an uneasy partnership with the player, like, getting thrown into a three-legged race with a total stranger. You don't know who they are, but now you need to cooperate.
Yeah, I mean, to be able to say, and I guess another game that kind of reminds me of that, where it's flat out telling you exactly what its intentions are, is something like the Beginner's Guide, where, you are investigating these environments through the proxy of Davey Wreden, but at the same time, he basically says all of his criticisms about Coda's games, he's flat out telling you exactly what he thinks of them. And then there's a tension between how you experience Coda's games and what he's telling you about them, and he has to follow through on that. Yeah, so there's again this tension with Travis where he has apathy and, in the best case scenario, contempt for you. So the game seems to have that, and yet you have to embody this character and resolve a sort of tension with him.
Right.
And I'd ask yourself, do I even like this guy?
Yes.
Do I even want to be this person?
I think that is a question that you're really asking through the whole game. You're being asked to inhabit somebody who is shallow and, in many situations, unlikable. and at the same time embodies a lot of qualities that at the beginning of this, Travis has his anime figurine collections, he's got his wrestling masks, and
Yeah.
that
Luchador is fucking cool, though. I can't fault him for that.
I don't think anybody should.
Yeah.
It's super cool, and that's one of the things, though. It's like his enthusiasm for these things is genuine, and one of the things. If you are an enthusiastic person, if you have the kind of personality where you can respond to interests in that way, that is immediately relatable. It's like at the beginning of this game, Travis has not been an assassin. This is not like a week in the life of Travis Touchdown Assassin. This is like the first steps into assassinhood. At the very start, he's like, I want to be number one. And so there's something kind of instantly likable about somebody who is enthusiastic and who has the gumption and kind of audacity to make that kind of flagrant statement.
I can actually kind of see, because on the one hand, he has this audacity to be like a serial killer, which is, I mean, because he is this sort of otaku stereotype, I think there's the possibility that there are players who would maybe see some of themselves in him and reject him on that basis.
Huh.
Because it's like a funhouse mirror reflection of themselves, and I think a lot of people would look at that and go, nah, that's not me.
Right.
Yeah,
I think that in games, we like to call things satires in a kind of hand-wavy manner to avoid accounting for enjoying things that we might feel self-conscious about owning. And we don't follow through by asking, what does this satire mean about us specifically, which renders it inoffensive and useless. Well, that brings us to the end of the Volodarskii fight. Lana, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Everybody, see you next time.